The river had not frozen in 11 years. That was what Jonah said to himself when he saw it from his south bank on the morning of the 3rd day of January, standing at the edge of his property where the cut bank dropped to the water, and seeing, instead of water, a flat gray expanse of ice that had formed in the night and that caught the early light in a way that water never did. He looked at it for a long time. He looked at the north bank. He could see the smoke from Margret's chimney from here, the same way he could see it every morning from this spot, which was the spot he came to when he needed to look at something that wasn't his own operation for a while. He had been coming to this spot for 6 years. He had never told anyone that. Margret saw it from the north bank at roughly the same hour. She had come to the river to break the ice at the waterhole for her horses and found the hole already frozen, and then found the river already frozen, and then found herself standing at the edge with the iron bar in her hand looking at the south bank, where she could see the smoke from Jonah's chimney, the same smoke she could see from her own north window every morning. She had been seeing that smoke for 6 years. She had not told anyone that either. She was 43 years old and had been on the North Bank homestead since 1876, which was 7 years ago, the year before her husband Daniel died. Daniel had died in the spring of 1877 from an injury that happened so quickly and so casually. A fence post falling wrong, an unlucky angle, a Tuesday in May that had been entirely ordinary until it wasn't. That she had spent the better part of 2 years simply absorbing the specific wrongness of it. Not the grief exactly, though there was grief. More the particular incomprehension of a thing that should not have been possible simply happening, without warning, in the middle of an ordinary week. She had stayed on the homestead because it was hers and Daniel's, and because going back east would have required being, again, the woman whose husband had died, which was a story she had been defined by long enough in Ohio before they left, and which she had decided she was done with. She had stayed because the North Bank homestead had good water and reasonable soil and produced enough to support one person who was careful, and she was careful, and she had learned to be careful about everything. 6 years alone had made her good at the specific competencies of solitude, the quiet efficiency of a single person's household, the way she could make decisions without consulting anyone and had stopped expecting to. She had also learned, more slowly and with less intention, the particular ache of watching someone on the other side of a river go about their life for 6 years and having nothing practical to say about it. She had been Jonah's neighbor for 6 years. The river between their properties ran about 40 yards wide at the narrowest crossing, which was 40 yards wider than comfortable conversation, and wide enough in spring and fall to make fording genuinely dangerous and in winter impassable without the specific intervention of an unusually cold January. In summer, when the water dropped, it was fordable on horseback if you knew what you were doing and chose the right crossing point. She knew what she was doing and she knew the right crossing point, from the years of watching the river, but she had not crossed. Neither had he. The uncrossed distance had become its own fact, the kind of fact that accumulates weight the longer it goes unremarked. They had waved, which was possible at 40 yards in clear weather. They had shouted across occasionally, practical things, the kind of exchange that was better than nothing and worse than conversation. She had heard him working his property on still mornings, the sounds carrying across the water. She presumed he had heard her. They had exchanged exactly 28 sentences in 6 years, which she had counted not as an act of melancholy but because when the supply of something is finite and measurable, counting is a form of attention. 28 sentences in 6 years. Fewer words than a short letter. And now 3 days of frozen river, which was the geography making an offer it had not made in 11 years. Jonah had been on the South Bank since 1874, which was 2 years before Margret arrived. He had built the operation himself from a parcel of land and a modest herd and 9 years of work that had produced what was visible from the North Bank, a solid cattle operation, 12 head through the winter, a barn that had been rebuilt twice as the operation grew, a house that had been added to once. He had come west at 38 with his wife Eleanor, who had lasted 2 years before deciding with the specific clarity that the frontier either produces or denies, that the life she needed was not available in this county. She had gone back to Ohio in 1877. She had been right to go. He had known she was right to go even while she was leaving, which had been the particular loneliness of it. The kind of loneliness that comes not from being abandoned, but from being honestly known. He had been alone for 9 years. He had watched the North Bank homestead across the river absorb a newcomer in 1876, and then absorb a death in 1877, and then watch a woman work a property alone for 6 years in the specific way of someone who has decided that the working is the answer, and the question can wait. He had thought about crossing in summer. He had not crossed. He had told himself it was the river and had mostly believed it, which was how most things we tell ourselves work. Mostly for a while. She stepped onto the ice on the first afternoon with the iron bar and tested it, and it held. She went 10 feet out, tested again, held. She went 20 feet and stopped. The South Bank was close in the winter clarity in a way it was never close in summer. Winter stripped out all the visual noise, the green of summer, the shimmer of the water, and left just the distance, which was shorter than she had spent 6 years understanding it to be. She could see his barn roof. She could see the cut bank at his south edge. She could see, if she looked, the spot where she had watched him stand looking at the north bank more times than she had counted. She stood in the middle of the frozen river for a long time. She had come out to assess the ice for her horses. She was assessing something else now, and she knew it. And she stood in the cold with the iron bar hanging from her right hand, and her dark red scarf around her neck, and the south bank 40 yards ahead, and the north bank 40 yards behind, and herself exactly in the middle, which was where she had been in a different sense for 6 years, and which felt, standing on the ice in the January cold, like a description of something she was ready to be done with. She heard boots on ice from the direction of the south bank. Jonah had done exactly what she had done. Come to the bank to look, stepped out, tested the surface, come further. They met approximately in the middle, which was no one's plan, which was why it happened. He said, "Morning." She said, "Morning." He said, "River froze." She said, "Yes." A pause. He said, "First time in 11 years." She said, "That's what I was thinking." They stood in the middle of the frozen river in the Colorado January cold for a moment, looking at each other at a distance of about 6 feet, which was closer than they had ever been. He said, "Your water hole freeze over." She said, "Solid." He said, "I've got a spring on the south bank that doesn't freeze. Your horses are welcome to it." She said, "That's kind." Another pause. He said, "You could come over and see it." She said, "All right." That was the first afternoon. She crossed to the south bank. 6 years on the north bank and 1 step across the ice, and suddenly she was on the other side, which she had known intellectually was 40 yards and which felt in the crossing like a distance she had not properly measured. The south bank ground was different from hers, slightly sandier, the grass a different mix of species, the smell of the air slightly changed by the different soil and the different proximity to his barn. Small differences. She noticed all of them. He showed her the spring, a reliable upwelling 20 yards from the river, surrounded by the flat rock shelf that kept it accessible even when the snow was deep. She understood immediately why it didn't freeze. He had built a simple stone enclosure around it, practical and adequate. She said, "When did you build that?" He said, "Third winter. Learned from the second." She said, "Smart." He said, "Necessary." She said, "They're often the same thing." They walked the edge of his south property for an hour in the cold while he explained the water management and the winter pasture arrangement, and she asked questions that came from real knowledge of the same problems on a smaller scale. He noticed that her questions were good, which meant she had already thought through most of what he was explaining and was confirming rather than learning from scratch. He did not say this. He just answered the questions and felt the specific satisfaction of being asked the right ones. He fed her supper, which was the plain, practical supper of a man who cooked for himself and had no one to cook for differently. Dried beef and beans and biscuits that were competent and nothing more. She ate without comment. She had 6 years of her own plain, practical suppers and understood that the eating was what mattered, not the performance of the eating. When she finished, she said, "That was good." It was a simple evaluation and accurate, and was the kind of compliment that a person gives who only gives compliments they mean. He said, "I'm glad you came across." She said, "So am I." At the door on her way back to the ice, she said, "Thank you for the water." He said, "Thank you for crossing." Neither of them said what they meant by that, because what they meant was the kind of thing that needed 3 days rather than 1 evening. On the second morning, she came across again without an occasion for it. which was the honest thing and required some honesty with herself to do. She brought a jar of apple preserves she had put up in the fall, which was a reason but was clearly also not the reason. He was fixing a hinge on his barn door when she arrived. He said, "Morning." She said, "Morning. I brought preserves." He looked at the jar. He said, "I haven't had apple preserves since I was in Missouri." She said, "I had a good year for apples." He said, "Come in when I've got this hinge." She waited. She looked at his cattle, which were wintered in the south pasture. 12 head, well kept, healthy in the way of animals that are properly managed through a hard winter. She had watched these cattle from her north window for years without being able to assess them, and the assessing now felt both practical and personal in a way she didn't examine. His barn was better constructed than hers, which she noted without resentment. He had more man-hours to put into it, before and probably after, and the construction showed the accumulated investment of someone who had been here 9 years and built accordingly. The inside of the house was the inside of a man who lived alone and had decided that this was a condition rather than a problem. Everything in its place, nothing out because no one had left it out, functional and clean and specific to one person's habits. She recognized the particular order of a single life because she had one on the shelf above the fireplace, a framed formal portrait photograph. A woman, perhaps 25, sitting studio pose with a painted backdrop, the kind taken in a city. No children in the frame. She was young and looked like a woman who had been brought somewhere she had not quite agreed to and was being photographed before the question was settled. Maggie looked at the photograph for a long time. She did not ask about it yet. He came in and made coffee and she said, "Who is in the photograph?" He looked at the shelf. He said, "My wife." She said, "I didn't know you were married." He said, "Was." He said it the same way he said most things, plainly, with the information offered without performance. She went back east in '77. She came out and she tried and it wasn't what she needed and she went back. I don't know where she is now. A pause. He said, "I don't know if we're still married technically. We never filed." Margret said, "I'm sorry." He said, "Don't be. She was right to go. I just couldn't make the life she needed out here and she couldn't make herself into someone who needed less." He looked at his coffee. "She deserved better than what I could give her in this place." Margret said, "She might have said the same about you." He said, "She didn't." A pause. "But she was kind about it." They talked for the better part of the afternoon. Not about anything that was leading somewhere specific, about the homestead and the cattle and the winter and the river and the years of being on opposite banks. He told her about coming west in 1874, 2 years before she arrived. She told him about Daniel and the fence post and the Tuesday in May. He said, "I saw you that summer, afterward. I didn't know what to say." She said, "There wasn't anything to say." He said, "No, but I could have come across and said nothing, which would have been something." She looked at him. She said, "Why didn't you?" He said, "I don't have a good answer for that." She said, "It wasn't the river." He said, "No." She said, "It was the same thing it's been for 6 years." He said, "Yes." She said, "Which is?" He said, "I wasn't sure what I had to offer." She said, "You could have let me decide that." He said, "Yes." A very long pause. "I know that now." She said, "What changed?" He looked at the window that faced the river. He said, "The river changed." She said, "The river froze." He said, "The river froze." That evening she sat at her north window with the lamp off so she could see the south bank better, which was something she had done before but never admitted to, and watched his lamp in his window until it went out. She did not know if he was watching her lamp. She suspected he was. This suspicion made her feel something she had no good word for. Not happiness exactly, not relief. Something more specific than either. She put the lamp out when she was ready and went to bed and lay in the cold dark listening to the river change. The third morning was the last morning. They both knew it from the weather. The temperature had lifted in the night and the thaw was visible in the quality of the morning light, the particular gold of warmer air coming in from the west. By afternoon the ice would be soft. By evening it would be water. She came across at 9 in the morning. He was at the south bank waiting. Not because they had arranged it, but because he had come to the bank when the light was right and he had not left. And she had crossed because the third day had a clock on it and she did not want to spend it deciding whether to come. They walked the south bank together without purpose or destination. The river was already changing. Small sounds, the particular groan and whisper of ice beginning to shift under its own weight and the warmer air. And both of them could hear it, and neither of them said anything about what the hearing meant, she said. How many times did you almost come across? He walked beside her for a moment. He said, More than I can count, she said. I know, he said. How did you know? She said. I watched you come to the South Bank for years. You'd stand there and look and go back, he said. You saw that, she said. The North Bank has a clear view of the South Bank, he said. Yes. A pause. He said, How many times did you almost come across? She said, I don't have an exact number. He said, More than you counted, she said. The counting was the almost crossing. Every time I counted a sentence, that was an almost. He said, 28 almosts. She said, 28 that were close enough to count. He stopped walking. He said, I can ford the river in summer, when the water's low. She said, I know the crossing point. He said, It's not the same as this. She said, No, it's not the same. A pause. But it's something, he said. Yes. She said, Then come in the summer. He looked at her, the full direct look of a man who has stopped looking at things sideways for 3 days and is not going back to that. He said, I'll come in the summer. She said, Good. She held out her hand. He took it. He held it for a moment, not briefly, not dramatically, just held it, which was itself a sentence which she counted and let it go. Neither of them was ready for more than that, and both of them knew they were not. And the knowing was honest, and honest was what they had been the entire 3 days. She crossed back at noon, which was earlier than she wanted to, and later than was practical given the state of the ice. She walked carefully now, testing each step, the surface not quite what it had been on the first afternoon. She reached the north bank and turned. Jonah was standing at the south bank watching her cross, which was what she expected, and when she reached the north side he lifted his hand, which was not a wave exactly, more the gesture of a man acknowledging a thing that had happened, which was not nothing. She lifted her hand back. They stood on their respective banks for a moment, the softening river between them, and then he turned and walked back toward his house. By 4 o'clock the river was running. Not dramatically. It did not break up with noise and urgency. It simply softened and ran, the way Colorado rivers thaw in the particular unhurried way of things that have been here longer than anyone deciding things. She stood at the north bank and watched it go. She put more wood on the fire and made supper for one, which was what she always had done, and ate it at the table by the north window where she had been looking at the South Bank's chimney smoke for 6 years. The smoke was there. It would be there tomorrow. The river would be a river. She had counted 28 sentences in 6 years. She did not count the sentences of the 3 days because she had stopped counting at some point on the first afternoon and had not started again. Some things you stop measuring when the supply becomes sufficient. She knew the summer was coming and that the river would be low enough to ford in August, and that she had 3 days' worth of things she had not finished saying, and that this was the right kind of unfinished, the kind with somewhere to go.